Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today, we're venturing into the shadows with 9 of the most unnerving Dogman encounters ever recorded. In this episode, we'll step deep into the wilderness of terror. 9 unsettling stories that dance between legend and truth. Each account you're about to hear is inspired by real-life testimonies from people who swear they've seen something that defies explanation. Their words, their fear, their lives, forever marked by what they encountered. For the sake of privacy, certain names and details have been changed. But the essence of what happened remains untouched. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe for daily true horror stories that linger long after the lights go out. And hit that notification bell, because when the darkness calls, you'll want to be ready. My name is Nicholas, and the story I'm about to share happened on a quiet stretch of farmland in western Pennsylvania, about 45 minutes outside Pittsburgh. It was the fall of 2019. My wife Sarah, our 2 kids, Emma and Jacob, and I had settled there 3 years earlier, chasing a simpler existence away from the noise and strain of city life. Our land spread across 60 acres of mixed pasture and woodland, bordered on 2 sides by dense forest that stretched endlessly into the hills. When night came, it brought with it a darkness so deep it swallowed everything beyond the soft glow of the porch light. The kind of black that makes you wonder if daylight was ever real at all. We kept livestock, chickens, goats, and a few horses. They gave rhythm to our days, a kind of purpose in the quiet rural life we'd chosen. But they also meant I spent long, solitary hours outside, tending fences, checking feed, fixing things that always seemed to break. That solitude, what I used to call peace, would soon turn into something far darker. I've always been the sort of person who needs answers. If something doesn't make sense, I can't let it go until I've figured it out. That stubbornness had served me well as an engineer. But here, on this land, it would become the very thing that drew me toward a nightmare. It began with the animals. Late in September, the horses started acting strangely. They refused to enter the eastern pasture, an open stretch near the tree line that they'd grazed in all summer. If we tried to lead them there, they'd rear up, eyes rolling white, and bolt back toward the barn. The chickens stopped laying. Even our German shepherd, Scout, usually fearless, wouldn't leave the yard after dusk. Sarah said it was probably coyotes, or maybe a wild dog pack moving through. But I'd grown up around farms. I knew the signs of predators: tracks, scat, the nervous pattern in animal behavior that comes from instinctive caution. This was something else. They weren't afraid of being hunted. They were afraid of something wrong. Something they couldn't understand. By early October, I decided to start a proper investigation. I bought a set of motion-activated trail cameras and mounted them around the property, along the tree line, behind the barn, near the chicken coop. I told Sarah I wanted to catch whatever was scaring the animals. That was partly true. But deep down, I already suspected there was more to it than simple wildlife. For 2 weeks, I went through every recording each night. Hours of footage: raccoons, deer, the occasional fox. Nothing unusual. Then, on October 18th, at exactly 3:12 a.m., I found something that made my blood run cold. The camera positioned at the back edge of the property, about 150 yards from the barn, had captured movement. At first, I thought it was a bear. The shape was enormous, moving on 2 legs, but the proportions were wrong. The arms were far too long, hanging almost to its knees. The head was narrow, elongated, like a wolf's muzzle, only larger. And it didn't move like any animal I'd ever seen. It walked, upright, deliberate, aware. It crossed the clearing in just a few steps, muscles rippling under coarse dark fur. Then, It stopped directly in front of the camera and turned its head. For a moment, it seemed to stare straight into the lens. Its eyes glowed pale green, reflecting the infrared light. Not like an animal's eye shine, this was focused, intentional. It held that gaze for several seconds before vanishing back into the trees with unnerving speed. I watched that clip 17 times before dawn. I couldn't sleep. Couldn't even look away. The longer I stared, the more certain I became that whatever this was, it wasn't a bear or a person in a costume or anything that should exist in this world. Still, by morning I'd tried to rationalize it. The footage was grainy. Maybe I'd misjudged the proportions. The light could have distorted the image. Bears can stand upright, I told myself. But the logical part of me was at war with something ancient. The instinctive, animal part that whispered, "Run." Over the next 3 weeks, things escalated. The cameras caught it again. October 19th, then the 23rd. Each time between 2 and 4 a.m. Each time the figure skirted the tree line, pacing the boundary of our land like it was studying us. Once, it came closer. Close enough to pass directly in front of the barn. Then one night it stepped inside. The recording showed the barn door swinging open, wide enough for the creature's frame. It ducked slightly as it entered. For 8 full minutes it stayed inside. I watched the timestamp tick by, feeling sick as I realized I had no idea what it was doing in there. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it slipped back into the dark. At dawn, I went out to investigate. The air was still. The ground near the barn was churned up, like something heavy had moved through. When I reached the chicken coop, my stomach dropped. Every bird, 32 of them, was dead. But there was almost no blood. No signs of a struggle. They hadn't been torn apart or eaten like predator kills. It was as though something had simply extinguished them. That image has never left me. I didn't tell Sarah everything. I said it was probably a wild animal, a rabid coyote maybe. But I knew that was a lie. I'd seen the way it looked at the camera, the way it moved with intention, like it knew exactly what it was doing. Over the next nights, the sounds began. Low growls echoing from the tree line, the thud of something heavy moving just beyond sight. Scout would whine and scratch at the door, refusing to go out even to relieve himself. The horses stayed pressed against the far wall of the barn, trembling until dawn. I stopped reviewing the footage after that. I couldn't bring myself to watch anymore. Every time I thought about those glowing eyes, I felt that same primal dread. An instinctive terror older than words. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't just passing through. It was watching, studying, waiting, and somewhere deep in the woods behind our home, it's still out there. They were arranged in a perfect line, every body placed with deliberate precision, as if some twisted ritual had taken place right there on the dirt floor. That detail haunted me more than anything. Predators kill for hunger or instinct, but this was something else. After that morning, I began keeping a journal. At first, it was a way to stay sane, to organize my thoughts. But deep down, I knew I might need a record, something tangible, if whatever was happening decided to go further. I also started sleeping in the barn. Each night I took a rifle and a heavy flashlight and made my bed in the loft, high above the stalls. Sarah thought I'd lost my mind. We argued constantly. She wanted to call the Pennsylvania Department of Wildlife. She wanted experts, men with tranquilizers and trucks. I refused. I can't fully explain why. It wasn't stubbornness. It was more like an instinct, an unshakable feeling that involving outsiders would only draw this thing closer. Whatever was out there had chosen us. It wasn't random. It was watching, waiting, testing. And somehow I knew it didn't want attention. So I told Sarah we'd handle it ourselves. By the time November came, the air had grown brittle and cold. Frost coated the barn windows, and the nights seemed longer than they should have been. I was worn down from weeks of sleepless vigils, waking before dawn and sitting in that loft for hours, staring into the dark. Some part of me started to believe it was over, that maybe the freezing weather had driven it off into the mountains, but the feeling of being watched never left. During the day, while I mended fences or stacked firewood, I'd sense it, the weight of unseen eyes pressing on the back of my neck. I'd turn, expecting to see something there, but there was only the wind moving through the trees. Then came the night of November 3rd. I was in the loft again, rifle beside me, flashlight in my lap. The barn smelled of old hay and metal and fear. The horses shifted uneasily below, stamping and snorting at the slightest sound. Around 2 a.m. I heard it, the creak of the barn door. I had left it unlocked on purpose. Part of me needed to know what would happen if I didn't stand in its way. The wood groaned as something massive pushed the door open. I froze. In the faint light filtering through the cracks, I saw movement, broad shoulders, a hunched silhouette. It ducked under the frame, clearing the entrance with ease. Even from above, I could tell how huge it was. 7.5 feet, maybe more. The shape was wrong for any known animal. Muscular but elongated, its limbs jointed in strange, unnatural ways. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace, scanning the barn like it knew the space. It made its way to the feed bins, lifting the lids with startling precision, its long fingers, or claws, curling around the edges. Then it turned toward the back corner, where I'd covered a pile of carcasses from livestock we'd lost earlier in the fall. We'd planned to bury them when the ground thawed. The creature found them. It crouched low, pulled the tarp aside, and began to eat. The noises it made were horrific, wet, guttural sounds that vibrated through the wood beams. They weren't growls, not exactly, but something in between a canine rumble and a human moan. The entire barn seemed to tremble with the resonance of it. My hands shook. Every instinct screamed to run, but I couldn't. I was trapped between curiosity and terror, frozen by the awful compulsion to see. Slowly, I raised the rifle and took aim at its chest. As if sensing my movement, it stopped eating. The air changed. I heard it inhale, a deep, dragging breath that sounded like it was sucking the oxygen from the entire barn. Then, it lifted its head. Our eyes met. Even in near-total darkness, I could see them. 2 pale green orbs glowing with a terrible awareness. And worse than the intelligence in them was what came next. A flicker of amusement. It tilted its head slightly, lowering its stance, like a predator sizing up prey. Then it made a sound. A low, resonant challenge that cut through me like a blade. It wasn't an animal cry. It was something primeval. Something ancient that spoke to the buried parts of human fear. I fired. The explosion of the gunshot filled the barn, deafening. I saw the bullet hit, saw its shoulder jerk back. But it didn't bleed. It didn't even flinch. Instead, it straightened to its full height, eyes blazing with fury, and began to climb. The ladder. It scaled it in seconds, those long arms pulling its massive frame upward with impossible speed. I fired again and again, barely able to keep the weapon steady. One shot struck its ribs, Another tore through its thigh. But neither slowed it. The thing kept coming. Panic took over. I dropped the rifle and ran. Without thinking, I dove out the loft window into a mound of hay below. The impact knocked the wind out of me, but adrenaline forced me to my feet. Behind me, the creature roared, a sound so deep it rattled the air, vibrating in my chest like thunder. I bolted for the house. My lungs burned, my legs screaming, but I didn't stop. I could hear it behind me. The rhythm of its breath, heavy and deliberate, closing the distance. I reached the porch, slammed through the back door, and threw the deadbolt just as it reached the yard. Sarah was in the kitchen, her face pale. The kids were crying upstairs, awakened by the gunfire and my shouting. "Call 911, I gasped. "There's something out there, something not human." She grabbed the phone, hands shaking, but as she did, everything went silent. The breathing outside stopped. The footsteps vanished. Even the horses quieted, as if the night itself were holding its breath. I looked through the window, half expecting to see its face staring back. There was only the black emptiness of the yard. Sarah spoke to the dispatcher, voice trembling, while I stood by the door with the largest kitchen knife I could find, fully aware that if that thing decided to come through the wall, nothing I held would make a difference. But it didn't come. The darkness remained still, silent, and endless. And for the first time I wondered if it wasn't retreating, just watching again, from somewhere just beyond the edge of the light. We waited in silence, too frightened to move. Every creak of the house made my heart seize. Nearly 20 minutes crawled by before the blue and red strobe of police lights washed over the yard. Relief hit me like a wave, though it was quickly replaced by something colder when I saw their faces. The officers combed the property carefully. They found what I already knew was there. Massive tracks pressed deep into the mud, smeared blood on the side of the barn, and pieces of something that defied logic. Near the wall lay what was left of the deer carcass, the same one the creature had been feeding on. But this wasn't a normal animal kill. The cuts were deliberate, clean, like someone had used a knife. Yet the claw marks that scored the flesh were impossibly deep, far too wide for any bear or coyote. The official report blamed a bear, a sick or unusually aggressive one, they said. But even as the officers wrote that explanation, their eyes betrayed them. They had seen enough to know this wasn't something they could file neatly away under wildlife incident. After that night, we turned our home into a fortress. I installed high-end cameras, motion sensors, and infrared lights. We built fencing along the tree line and hired private security to watch the property at night. But no amount of protection could erase the feeling that something still lingered out there. The creature never returned, not visibly, but its shadow remained. 6 months later, we sold the farm. The new owners seemed unconcerned when I mentioned strange noises and the sense of being watched. Within a week of moving in, they reported hearing howls in the woods, but they stayed. We didn't. We moved to the suburbs, surrounded by neighbors, streetlights, and the comforting sounds of distant traffic. Civilization, safety, or at least the illusion of it. But some nights, when the wind blows from the north and the air carries that same cold scent of autumn, I'm back there again, in that barn, beneath that gaze. That night changed something inside me. Because in the instant our eyes met, I knew, without doubt, that what I saw wasn't an animal. It was intelligent. It was studying me. It had chosen us. And that realization was the most terrifying truth of all. We weren't victims of chance. We were being selected, watched, analyzed by something that moved according to laws and instincts far older than ours. Sometimes I wonder if part of its plan was mercy or mockery. It could have killed me. It didn't. And that has haunted me ever since. The question that echoes in my mind, even now, 5 years later, is simple. Why? The vanishing on Route 19. My name is Ellie, and though I've wrestled with this for years, I'm finally ready to tell my story. I'm sharing it because I believe people deserve to know what's out there. What might still be hiding where civilization thins into wilderness. What I witnessed may connect directly to the disappearance of my best friend, Catherine Marsh, who vanished on September 14, 2017, along a lonely stretch of highway in West Virginia. Her case was never solved. The police eventually stopped investigating. But I never could. Because I was there. I know what we saw on those roads. And I know that whatever it was hasn't gone away. Catherine and I had been best friends since the 7th grade. We grew up together in Parkersburg, a small industrial town nestled beside the Ohio River in the northern part of the state. We went to the same schools, attended the same college, and after graduation, we both found jobs nearby. Catherine worked as a quality control manager at a chemical plant, and I was an engineer for a manufacturing company. We were both busy, buried in the routines of adulthood, but we stayed close. Regular phone calls, monthly dinners, endless inside jokes from our teenage years. She was more than a friend. She was family. By that September, things weren't going well for her. Her marriage was falling apart. She'd been fighting with her husband over custody of their daughter, and the tension was tearing her apart. Our dinners had become her lifeline, a place to talk, to cry, to breathe without judgment. On September 11th, she called me late at night. Her voice was shaking. Her husband had told her that if she filed for divorce, he would take their daughter away. She was terrified, desperate. She said she needed to clear her head, to get out, to talk in person, away from everything. She asked if I'd go for a drive with her that Sunday. I said yes without hesitation. We planned to meet at a rest stop along Route 19, about 30 miles south of Parkersburg. If you've ever driven that road, you know what it feels like. Isolated, endless. The kind of highway where the forest seems to press in from both sides, where cell service fades, and time feels different. That Sunday evening, the sky was heavy with low clouds. But the weather report had promised a clear night. We met at the rest stop around 6:30 p.m. The light was fading, the horizon tinted orange and gray. I remember the smell of damp pine and the soft hum of insects rising from the woods. Catherine looked exhausted. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and she'd lost noticeable weight since I'd last seen her 2 weeks earlier. Still, she managed a weak smile and hugged me tightly before suggesting we get on the road. She led the way in her car, and I followed a few lengths behind. For the first hour it was peaceful, quiet 2-lane roads winding through the Appalachian foothills. The scenery was breathtaking, ridges fading into blue haze, thick forests stretching for miles, the kind of landscape that makes you feel both awed and insignificant. We didn't talk much at first, just drove, letting the road do the talking. I could see her silhouette through her rear window, occasionally wiping at her eyes. The sun sank lower, and the woods began to swallow the light. Around 7:45, we stopped at a scenic overlook, a clearing that opened onto a wide valley cut by a river far below. We stood by the railing, looking out at the view. For the first time all evening, Catherine seemed lighter. She talked about her daughter, how smart she was, how much she loved reading. She spoke about starting over, maybe moving to another town, maybe even changing careers. For a few precious minutes, I saw the old Catherine again, the one who laughed easily and dreamed big. But neither of us could have guessed how quickly that hope would turn to horror. I remember feeling strangely hopeful for her that evening, like the drive had finally done what she needed it to do. Catherine's voice carried a quiet steadiness again, and I thought maybe, just maybe, she had started to reclaim a small piece of herself. We got back in our cars at around 7:20 p.m., just as the sun dipped below the tree line. The sky had deepened into that bruised blend of indigo and violet that always feels more like a warning than a color. Catherine's taillights glowed ahead of me, the only warmth in an expanding sea of darkness. We had not passed another car for what felt like an eternity. 40 minutes, maybe more. The silence pressed down on everything. The world beyond the headlights felt empty, stripped of sound and motion, as if the rest of the world had quietly ended and only the two of us remained. Then, coming around a long, shallow bend in the highway, I noticed something standing on the shoulder ahead. It was positioned just inside the reach of Catherine's headlights, maybe 50 yards away. At first I assumed it was a person, a stranded motorist perhaps, waiting for help. But when her lights fell directly upon it, my body went cold. The proportions were wrong, horribly wrong. It towered over the roadside markers, easily 7 feet tall, its frame too broad, its limbs too long. The posture was upright but not human, and the head wasn't right at all. The shape was narrow, elongated, like a wolf's, but somehow more deliberate, more aware. Catherine didn't react. Her car never slowed, never swerved. She drove straight past as though nothing were there at all. That unnerved me more than the figure itself. Even if she hadn't seen it clearly, instinct alone should have made her tap the brakes. When I reached the same stretch of asphalt, my headlights caught the thing full on. For a single impossible instant, I saw it with absolute clarity. Its body shrouded in dark, matted fur, its stance balanced perfectly on two powerful hind legs. The arms hung nearly to its knees, tipped with fingers or claws that glinted faintly. Its head was unmistakably canine. But the eyes, those eyes faced forward, like a person's, not off to the sides like any normal predator. And it was looking directly at me. There was intelligence there, a cold, deliberate awareness that made every primitive part of my mind scream that this was something outside the natural order. Something that was thinking. I pressed down on the accelerator, trying to close the distance between my car and Catherine's. My hands were shaking so violently that the steering wheel blurred. I kept my eyes fixed on her taillights, the only anchor in that endless dark. When I finally managed to signal her, she pulled off at a small scenic overlook, a slab of cracked pavement with a view of the valley below. I parked beside her and jumped out before my car had even finished rocking from the stop. "Did you see that?" I shouted, breathless, half hysterical. Her window rolled down slowly. Catherine looked at me, puzzled. "See what?" "The thing on the road, that thing standing there. It looked right at me." She frowned, trying to make sense of my words. "Ellie, it was probably a deer, or maybe a bear standing up. You know how shadows play tricks when the light's low." But she didn't believe her own explanation. I could see it in her eyes. There was a flicker of something there, an unease she couldn't name. She suggested we turn back toward Parkersburg. The air had grown heavy, the night settling in too fast. and neither of us wanted to keep driving deeper into the wilderness. I didn't argue. I just nodded and followed her lead. We turned our cars north and began retracing our route. The road wound through dense forest, the treetops knitting overhead into an almost solid ceiling. The darkness felt alive. Within minutes, I began to sense movement along the edges of the woods. At first, I thought it was an illusion, the afterimage of the headlights shifting through the trees. But then I saw shapes. Large, shadowed forms pacing us through the forest. Not one, but several. They moved with uncanny coordination, keeping pace with our cars no matter how quickly we went. Every so often, one of them would dart between the trunks, a flash of motion that made my stomach lurch. My fear built until I could barely breathe. I called Catherine from the car. "Something's wrong," I told her as soon as she answered. "We need to get to a town. Just drive faster. Don't stop. Don't pull over for anything." "Ellie, what are you talking about? What's happening?" "Please," I begged. "Just drive." She must have heard something in my voice because she accelerated immediately. We were now flying down the winding mountain highway, 70 miles an hour or more, taking curves that should have been handled at half that speed. But no matter how fast we went, the movement in the trees didn't stop. I caught glimpses, broad shoulders, glinting eyes, the ripple of something enormous threading through the forest beside us. It felt organized, deliberate, as if these things weren't chasing us at all but guiding us, herding us towards something unseen. Then, without warning, Catherine's brake lights flared bright red. Her car slowed sharply. I slammed my own brakes, heart hammering. She was staring at something ahead, something I couldn't yet see. Then, to my disbelief, she veered suddenly off the highway, turning onto a narrow gravel access road that disappeared into the black wall of the trees. This wasn't our route. This wasn't anyone's route. I leaned on my horn, flashing my headlights, trying to signal her to come back. But she didn't respond. Her car continued up the rough track until her taillights vanished behind the trees. For a few seconds, I sat frozen at the intersection, torn between instinct and reason. Following her meant plunging into the same darkness where those things moved. But leaving meant abandoning her completely. In the end, fear made my choice for me. I stayed on Route 19 and drove as fast as my car could manage, all the way to the nearest town, Beckley. I stumbled into the police station and reported Catherine missing. I told them everything, except the impossible parts. I left out the details about the creatures. Who would have believed me? The police launched a search that same night. They found her car 3 miles up that gravel road, parked neatly, doors locked, headlights off. The keys were still inside. No footprints, no sign of a struggle, no evidence that she'd even stepped out of the vehicle. It was as if she had simply ceased to exist. Over the next 6 months, law enforcement scoured every inch of that forest. Search dogs, divers, volunteers. Nothing. Not a scrap of clothing, not a personal item, not a trace of her at all. The official explanation settled on the simplest theory, that Catherine, distraught over her crumbling marriage, had driven into the woods and either become lost or ended her life. But I knew that wasn't true. Catherine wasn't suicidal, and she hadn't turned down that road willingly. Something had drawn her there, something I'd seen with my own eyes. 8 years later, I returned to that place once, in daylight, with my husband beside me. The overlook was exactly as I remembered, silent and ordinary, as if nothing terrible had ever happened there. The gravel access road was still visible, cutting off into the dense line of trees. We stood there for less than a minute before I heard it. A low, pulsing sound from somewhere deep in the forest. It might have been the wind. It might have been something else. We left without saying a word. Catherine was 28 when she vanished. Her daughter was 6. She grew up without a mother. And to this day, whenever I read about a missing person in the Appalachian foothills, I feel the same chill move through me. I wonder how many of those disappearances were written off as accidents, or grief, or poor decisions in the dark. How many of them were really something else. Sometimes, late at night, I dream that Catherine is still out there. Not dead, not gone, just trapped, wandering that forest where the trees never stop whispering. My name is Adam. I used to be a wildlife photographer. Since October 14th, 2018, I haven't lifted a camera for anything other than proof of life. That night ended the career I'd built over 3 decades and cost me the closest friend I ever had. What follows comes from official records, private testimony, and the photographs that were later recovered by investigators. Images I wish I could unsee. The truth has never been made public. Law enforcement decided long ago that the details would remain sealed. My partner's name was David Chen. He wasn't just my business collaborator. He was my brother in everything but blood. Together, we made a life out of chasing rare creatures through the wildest corners of northern Michigan. Our specialty was nocturnal birds, especially owls. David was the technical master, precise, patient, relentless in his pursuit of the perfect shot. I was the artist, the one who could find the emotion inside the frame. For years we built a reputation on our balance. Science and soul, reason and instinct. Our work appeared in National Geographic, in research journals, in exhibitions across the country. We thought we'd seen everything the wilderness could show us. We were wrong. And on that October night, something inside the woods decided to show us what it truly meant to be watched. In 2018, David and I were standing at the height of our careers. Our photographs were appearing in magazines. Our lectures were well attended. And we had earned a reputation for capturing the elusive and the extraordinary. That autumn, our next project was simple in concept. To document a rare great gray owl recently sighted in the dense wilderness surrounding the Seney National Wildlife Refuge in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. It was the kind of expedition we had done dozens of times before. We had our permits in order, notified refuge management, calibrated every camera and lens to David's meticulous standards. Everything was by the book. We were prepared, confident, and experienced enough to dismiss any sense of risk. There was no hint that this night would end any differently from the hundreds before it. At roughly 9 p.m., we decided to split up to increase our coverage area. The forest there was ancient, towering pines and hemlocks that swallowed moonlight and left only thin corridors of shadow. David moved northwest toward a grove where the owl had been spotted days earlier. I stayed closer to the southern trails, where the ground was more navigable and the underbrush sparse enough for clear shots. We kept in touch by radio, checking in every half hour as we always did. Around 10:30 p.m., David's voice came through, steady and calm. He said he'd found markings on a tree trunk, fresh gouges, probably made by large raptors. It sounded promising. He mentioned going deeper to investigate. I reminded him to stay within range and keep the channel open. When I tried to reach him again at 11, There was no response, only static. I called 3 more times. Each attempt met with the same hollow hiss. I assumed the signal was weak, or his radio battery had died. It happened often enough that I didn't panic, at least not yet. After another 20 minutes of silence, I decided to head his way. Navigating those woods at night is disorienting even for seasoned explorers. The GPS was unreliable under the canopy, and my headlamp barely pierced the darkness. It took me close to 40 minutes to reach the coordinates he had last reported. When I arrived, the first thing I noticed was David's equipment. His pack, tripod, and camera, all arranged neatly, as though he had stepped away for only a moment. But he wasn't there. The silence around me felt wrong, unnaturally still. Then I looked down. The ground was torn up, deep furrows and prints pressed into the damp earth. The impressions were enormous, each claw mark nearly 4 inches long, driven deep as though made by something with tremendous strength. Stranger still, the pattern of the tracks shifted. They began in a bipedal stride, then abruptly transitioned to 4-legged movement, as if the creature could alternate between walking upright and running on all 4s. My skin prickled. Every instinct in me screamed to leave, but I forced myself to stay focused. I dialed the Michigan State Police non-emergency line and reported David missing. They said they'd send officers immediately. While I waited, I tried to gather his things, anything that might help later. That's when I realized his camera was still mounted on the tripod. The battery indicator was blinking red, nearly dead, but the device still functioned. I scrolled through the playback and saw that David had taken several shots just before his radio went silent. I copied the files onto my portable drive, unsure why, only that I needed to keep them safe. The officers arrived shortly after 1 a.m. I led them back to the site, explaining everything as calmly as I could. By dawn, search and rescue teams were combing the area. Canine units joined the effort. For the next 3 days, every inch of that forest was searched. On the 3rd morning, about 200 yards from where I'd found his gear, they found David's body. He was lying at the base of a massive oak, partially concealed by fallen leaves. Despite the cool October weather, his remains showed signs of accelerated decomposition, an impossibility given the short time since our separation. The official report listed the cause of death as an animal attack, most likely a bear. But when I saw the injuries, that explanation made no sense. Bear wounds are predictable, long, raking slashes from claws meant to incapacitate. David's injuries were different. They were puncture wounds, circular and deep, arranged in symmetrical patterns across his chest and shoulders. Something had bitten him, or pierced him, with a jaw structure entirely unlike that of any known predator. The officer assigned to speak with me sounded unconvinced, even as he recited the official conclusion. His tone said one thing. His eyes said another. He didn't believe it was a bear either. But none of that prepared me for the photographs. Before law enforcement confiscated David's camera, I had already copied the images. I spent hours staring at them later, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The first few photos were exactly what we expected. Magnificent shots of the great gray owl perched high in the trees, the kind of work David was famous for. Crisp focus, exquisite composition, every feather visible. Then, the sequence changed. In the later frames, David's attention had clearly shifted to something else. The camera captured movement between the trees, and then, unmistakably, a shape, massive, upright, and covered in dark fur. The figure stood on two legs. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, its arms long enough that its hands, or claws, hung to mid-thigh. The head was that of a wolf, or, at least, something close to it. The proportions were off, longer, heavier, as though the skull itself had evolved for something beyond simple predation. What chilled me most wasn't its appearance, but the clarity of the photographs. They weren't the panicked, blurry shots of someone running for their life. They were composed, controlled. David had been doing what he always did, documenting. That meant he wasn't fleeing. Not yet. In the final image, the creature was so close that its face filled the frame. Its eyes were golden, reflective, catching the flash in a way that made them seem alive. The mouth was half open, revealing a set of teeth too large and too many for any species I've ever encountered. And in those eyes, God help me, there was recognition. Not animal fear, not rage. Recognition. Whatever it was, it knew what it was looking at. It knew him. I shared the photos quietly with a handful of trusted professionals, wildlife biologists, paleontologists, and yes, a few researchers in the field of cryptozoology. The feedback was unsettlingly consistent. The dentition visible in the image didn't correspond to any known species, living or extinct. One biologist told me the jaw configuration appeared evolutionarily impossible. A cryptozoologist I'd once dismissed as eccentric called me within an hour of seeing the files. He said the creature matched decades of reports across the Great Lakes region of something locals called the Dogman, a bipedal wolf-like being whispered about in rural Michigan folklore. He told me, in a trembling voice, that David's photographs were the clearest evidence ever captured. When I confronted the Michigan State Police, demanding to know why none of this was public, they told me the case was still under investigation and that releasing images could jeopardize future proceedings. That was 3 years ago. The investigation quietly ended. The files were sealed. The world moved on. But I haven't. David was no amateur. He knew wildlife. He respected boundaries. He wouldn't have approached a bear or a wolf, much less something unknown. And yet the photos show him facing that creature, calmly, deliberately, camera steady, lens focused. Whatever killed him didn't act out of hunger or confusion. It wasn't a random encounter. There was intent. There was purpose. And standing there in the half-light of that forest, moments before he vanished from the world, I believe David realized exactly what he was photographing. Something ancient, intelligent, and aware that it was being seen. Something that, for reasons I still can't comprehend, wanted to be seen. When I told my parents what I had seen, I expected them to laugh, perhaps scold me gently for believing in my grandmother's folklore. But they didn't. Instead, they looked at one another with an unease I had never seen before. They began to ask my grandmother questions, careful, deliberate questions, about the stories she used to tell. She answered them quietly, her voice trembling as she described the old accounts, the sightings, the warnings whispered through our family for generations. I remember the room feeling smaller, the air heavy with something unspoken. That night, my parents decided they would no longer ignore it. They planned to reach out to local authorities to see if there had been any unusual animal reports or dangerous activity in the area. When they made the call the next morning, the response was anything but reassuring. The officers they spoke with admitted there had been occasional reports of strange wildlife behavior, but they dismissed them as misunderstandings, nothing worth worrying about. Still, when my father pressed for specifics, their tone shifted. The officers became terse, guarded. One of them finally said something I will never forget. "Some things are better left alone. Some things you don't go looking for." That sentence has stayed with me for more than 30 years. It told me they knew something they weren't willing to discuss. Over the following weeks, the encounters intensified. I began seeing the creature almost every night, always near the edge of the woods. Sometimes it stood still, half concealed by the trees. Other times it moved slowly along the perimeter of our property, as though studying the layout. There was nothing random about its movements. It circled us methodically, mapping its boundaries with quiet precision. Then came the night it stepped onto our porch. My father had been sitting in the living room when he heard the boards creak. He grabbed his rifle, went to the back door, and saw the figure standing there, tall, broad-shouldered, and impossibly still. He raised the gun and fired a warning shot into the air. The creature didn't bolt or react like an animal startled by noise. It took a single step back, locked eyes with my father, and stared. For several long seconds, neither of them moved. Then, with slow, deliberate motion, the creature turned and disappeared into the forest. That look, it wasn't fear. It was comprehension. A few weeks later, in mid-November, it came back. This time it targeted our barn. We kept goats and chickens there, nothing valuable, but enough to sustain us. One morning, my father went out to feed the animals and found the door hanging open, the hinges twisted as if wrenched apart by tremendous strength. Inside, every animal was dead. None had been eaten or dragged away. They were arranged. Each carcass was placed in a circular pattern in the center of the floor, positioned with disturbing precision. It was not the chaotic aftermath of a predator's meal. It was a display, a message, a declaration of dominance, or perhaps intelligence. That was the moment my parents decided we could not stay another night. We contacted the landlord and told him we were ending the lease immediately. He didn't sound surprised. In fact, he seemed almost resigned. When my father asked whether he'd ever heard of anything like this happening before, the man grew defensive. He told us we were overreacting, but his eyes betrayed him. He knew. He knew exactly what we were talking about. We packed in silence for 2 days and moved into a small house in town, roughly 30 miles away, in early December. The relief was instant. Streetlights, neighbors, the hum of passing cars. All of it felt like safety. From that night onward, I never saw the creature again. My nightmares lingered, but the fear that had haunted our property faded in the presence of human civilization. I finished the school year in that new town, and by the following summer, we relocated again after my father took a new job. Life resumed its normal rhythm, or something close to it. But normal never truly returned. For years afterward, I avoided forests. I couldn't stand the dark. Even the sound of distant wind through trees made my stomach twist. Nightmares stalked me for nearly a decade. Visions of eyes watching from the tree line, of heavy breathing just beyond the door. When I was old enough, I finally sought therapy. My therapist helped me confront the trauma, though I never told her exactly what I had seen. Only my family knew the truth, or so I thought. Then, about 2 years ago, I found something that shattered my fragile understanding of the past. I had been researching our genealogy, searching through old digital archives and local history websites. One evening, I stumbled across an online forum dedicated to cryptid sightings in Appalachia. Out of curiosity, I clicked through and froze when I saw the name of our old county in one of the discussion threads. There were multiple accounts from that same region.
One was dated 1987, another 1999.
Both describing encounters with a large, upright creature that observed rural homes, stalked livestock, and moved silently through the woods. The descriptions were identical to what we had witnessed. But what stopped my breath was a post referencing an incident from 1952. That one described a farmhouse roughly 3 miles from where we had lived. The writer recounted the same details. The creature watching from the tree line, the livestock found mutilated but organized into geometric shapes, the family abandoning their home in haste. The echoes of my own childhood were unmistakable. It wasn't coincidence. It was continuity.
I contacted the user who had shared the 1952 story.
Through a series of emails, I learned that she was the daughter of the family who had lived there. Now in her 70s, she told me her family had endured months of torment. An unseen thing watching, approaching, escalating, until the night their animals were slaughtered. They had fled without explanation, leaving behind most of their belongings. She told me she had spent 50 years believing it might have been a child's nightmare, until my message arrived. When I shared my own story, she broke down crying. She said that, for the first time in half a century, she felt validated. She wasn't crazy. It had happened. That exchange changed everything. Since then, I have been compiling reports. So far, I have documented at least 8 verified encounters in that same small region of Kentucky, dating as far back as 1947. Every account follows the same unsettling pattern. A new family moves into a remote property. Within weeks, they begin to notice movement near the forest edge. Footsteps, shapes, eyes in the dark. Then, the observation becomes bold. Livestock are slaughtered, not for food but for display. Fear drives the family away. And after they leave, the creature vanishes, only to reappear months or years later, miles away, beginning the cycle again with someone new. It's a pattern that suggests intent. This is not random predation or coincidence. It is methodical, almost ritualistic. The creature, or perhaps more than one, seems to choose specific families, specific homes. It studies them, terrorizes them, but never annihilates them. Then it lets them go. For the past 2 years, that realization has consumed me. Why? Why choose certain families? What is it seeking? What logic drives this behavior? When I finally brought my findings to my parents, hoping for closure, the reaction was not what I expected. My father sat silently for a long time before finally speaking. His voice was low, almost resigned. He told me something he had never revealed before. Before we moved to that rural property, the landowner had warned him. The man mentioned that the previous tenants had left suddenly, claiming strange disturbances on the land. He had assured my father that it was nothing more than wildlife issues, some local superstition exaggerated by fear. My father, a practical man, had believed him. Now, he regretted it. That revelation confirmed what I had come to suspect. The land carried a history of recurrence, an unbroken chain of sightings and fear stretching back decades. We were simply another link in that chain. In time, I have come to a grim understanding. These entities, whatever they are, don't hunt in the conventional sense. They don't kill families, they study them. They instill fear deliberately, as though fear itself were their nourishment. Then, when their purpose is fulfilled, they allow their victims to leave, alive, but marked forever. They do not pursue, they do not destroy, they simply observe, terrify, and vanish. And though we escaped, I've learned that escape is not the same as freedom. The fear remains, a quiet, persistent echo that never entirely fades. I am telling my story now because others deserve to know. Families who live near those woods need to understand what might be watching from the tree line. Because what visited us was not a story, not folklore, not a superstition passed down through generations. It was real, and it is still there.
If you're thinking about moving to an isolated property anywhere in the Appalachian region, or in any place where reports of these creatures exist, you need to do your homework first. Ask questions. Learn the history of that land. Find out who lived there before you and what, if anything, they experienced. Because if the creature has ever chosen that spot as its focus, you will face a choice no one should ever have to make. Stay and endure the fear, or leave and carry it with you for the rest of your life. I'm 42 now. 50 years from today, someone else might read these words and see themselves reflected in them. Maybe they'll realize they're not imagining things, that what they saw was real, and that others have faced the same darkness in those Appalachian woods. More than anything, that sense of understanding, that proof that we are not alone, is why I'm telling this story.
My name is Gavin, and I'm 48 years old. I live near Portland, Oregon, where I work as a software engineer. For more than 2 decades, I've kept a steady jogging routine, 3 days a week without fail. Before the morning I'm about to describe, I'd never encountered anything in nature that challenged my belief in logic and science. I wasn't a believer in myths or unexplained forces. I trusted reason. But the morning of May 19, 2016, shook that certainty. My route was a familiar 6-mile loop. I'd run it hundreds of times, out my front door just after dawn, through the wooded trails that twist across the Pacific Northwest hills, then back home before work. The path felt like an old friend, predictable, well-traveled, and safe. Though the forest was wild, it wasn't remote. Other runners and hikers used those same trails, and the nearest town was only a few miles away. I knew every bend, every incline, every old tree root that crossed the path. That morning the weather was mild, cool enough for comfort, with thin clouds drifting overhead. Yet the forest struck me as unusually silent. Normally there would be birdsong, the distant rustle of deer, maybe the chatter of squirrels. But that day, nothing. The quiet pressed in, heavy and strange. I remember noting it with mild curiosity, thinking perhaps a storm front or barometric shift had silenced the wildlife. About 2 miles in, where the trail widens into an open glade, a prickling awareness crept over me. Someone or something was behind me. I hadn't heard footsteps or breathing, but the feeling was undeniable. A primal instinct, older than reason, told me I was being watched. I quickened my pace, irritated with myself for reacting to superstition. I'd always prided myself on being rational. Still, my body was responding to something I couldn't name. Each step felt heavier, each heartbeat louder. The unease didn't fade, it grew. To test myself, to prove there was nothing there, I veered onto a narrow side path that branched sharply uphill. I used it occasionally for a tougher workout. It was steeper, rougher, and far less traveled. My thinking was simple. If someone was following me, the sudden detour would throw them off. If nothing changed, I'd know it was all in my head. But almost immediately, the feeling of pursuit intensified. The trees closed in overhead, blotting out the early light. My breathing echoed between the trunks. Then I heard it.
A faint rustle not far away. Not the flutter of small animals, but the deliberate movement of something large, shifting through the brush parallel to me. I stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, 30 yards back down the trail, the branches parted. A shape emerged. Immense, upright, impossible. It stood on two legs, towering over the ferns, its body draped in dark, coarse hair. Easily 7.5 feet tall, maybe more. Broad-shouldered, thick-chested, its outline both animal and terribly human. For several heartbeats, we simply stared at each other. My mind struggled to supply an explanation. A bear rearing up? A man in costume? A trick of light and exhaustion? I clung to those rational possibilities because the alternative was unthinkable. Yet, even as I searched for logic, something deeper in me screamed that what I saw was wrong, fundamentally wrong. The proportions, the posture, the stillness, all alien. Its head was shaped vaguely like that of a wolf, but the eyes were forward-facing, focused, intelligent. It wasn't merely looking at me, it was studying me. Every instinct in my body told me to move. My legs acted before reason could catch up. I turned and ran, faster than I ever had in my life, the pounding of my shoes swallowed by the heavy hush of the forest. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel its gaze burning into me, measured, deliberate, almost curious. I don't remember the next mile. Adrenaline wiped it clean. What I do remember is bursting out of the woods into the gravel parking lot at the trailhead, gasping, drenched in sweat. The morning sun had climbed higher, and the world felt suddenly too bright, too ordinary, as though what I'd seen belonged to some separate reality entirely. For days afterward, I told myself it must have been a bear. I replayed the moment again and again, revising it in my memory to fit within reason. But deep down, I knew better. What I saw that morning was something beyond ordinary nature. Something aware of me in a way no animal should be. I've continued running since then, but never alone in the woods. And no matter how I try to rationalize it, there are moments, in the quiet just before dawn, when I swear I can still feel that same, unseen presence keeping pace beside me, waiting for me to turn my head. I spun around and tore down the trail, lungs burning, heart hammering so hard I could hear the pulse in my ears. Adrenaline surged like fire through my veins. I expected to hear it charging after me, but when I risked a glance over my shoulder, it wasn't chasing. It was shadowing me. The creature moved effortlessly, keeping a perfect distance. 20 yards, no more, no less. That was somehow worse than pursuit. It wasn't trying to catch me. It was herding me, dictating the pace of the hunt. Its speed was unreal. It glided through the trees with a rhythm that didn't belong to anything natural, as though gravity meant nothing to it. Each stride covered impossible ground, and yet it didn't seem to be exerting itself at all. It was simply matching me, studying how I'd react. The path began to slope downward, winding sharply between trunks and roots slick with moss. I used the incline to my advantage, pushing harder, letting gravity drag me faster. My calves screamed, my lungs burned, but I didn't dare slow down. I knew instinctively that keeping distance was my only chance. If it meant sprinting until my body gave out, so be it. The forest became a blur of color, greens and browns smeared by speed and panic. I barely registered the ground beneath me. One misstep would have sent me tumbling down the ravine, but I didn't care. Behind me came a sound that froze my blood. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't a roar. It was something deeper, older. A low vibration that rolled through the air and into my chest, resonating like a physical presence. The tone was both commanding and mocking, as if it wanted me to know it could end this chase at any moment. And yet, it let me run. The message was clear in that inhuman voice. Go. Run. I decide when this ends. The trail leveled out, leading toward the paved walking path that wound back toward the neighborhood near my home. I focused on that strip of asphalt as if it were salvation itself. When my shoes struck pavement, another sound echoed behind me. A short, guttural exhale that might have been laughter or contempt. I didn't turn to look. I couldn't. I just ran. My body was past its limit, every step agony, but I pushed harder, sprinting faster than I ever thought possible. The trees fell away, replaced by the small gravel parking area near the trailhead. I reached my car, yanked the door open, and threw myself inside. My hands shook so badly I could barely fit the key into the ignition. I slammed the locks, chest heaving, the taste of metal in my mouth. For half an hour I sat there, staring at the tree line, waiting for movement. Nothing stirred. The forest stood still and empty, the silence mocking me. Eventually, my breathing slowed. The rational part of my mind tried to reassert control. Maybe it had been a bear. Maybe I'd panicked and imagined details that weren't there. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. The precision, the intelligence, the way it toyed with me. No wild animal behaves like that. When I finally drove home, my hands still trembled on the steering wheel. I showered in silence, water scalding against my skin, and stared at my reflection in the mirror, half expecting to see something staring back. I called my manager and said I wouldn't be coming into work. I offered no explanation. Not feeling well was all I could manage. That afternoon, unable to rest, I turned to the internet. I typed in Oregon forest creature, upright animal sightings, Pacific Northwest mystery predator. The search results pulled me into a rabbit hole I hadn't known existed. Forums filled with eyewitness accounts, field reports, and grainy photographs. Over and over, one term appeared: Dogman. The descriptions matched perfectly. The height, the posture, the wolfish features, the deliberate intelligence. I read dozens of first-hand accounts, including one from a runner near Eugene who'd been attacked in 2009. She'd survived but spent weeks in the hospital with deep slashes down her arm. I felt sick. Still, I wanted answers. I called the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, described what I'd seen. The officer on the line was polite but dismissive. He said I'd likely startled a bear on its hind legs, that fear and exertion can distort perception. His tone was patient but patronizing, the kind used for frightened children. I didn't argue. There was no point. I knew what I'd seen. In the weeks that followed, I monitored local news and forums obsessively. More sightings surfaced. In June, a woman walking her dog near the Willow River reported seeing a tall, dark figure watching from the trees. In July, a family camping near Mount Hood described a chorus of howls and guttural moans unlike any known animal. In August, another jogger, this time on a trail 20 miles west, claimed to have glimpsed the creature at dusk before fleeing to safety. It became impossible to dismiss the pattern. Whatever I'd encountered wasn't alone. Activity was increasing, sightings clustering around the Portland area, all describing the same thing. An upright predator, 7 to 8 feet tall, with the intelligence to observe, test, and retreat. The most chilling discovery came from a small research blog run by an independent investigator. He'd been cataloging Dogman encounters in Oregon for more than 15 years. His data showed a rhythm, cycles of silence followed by flurries of encounters lasting months. Each wave, he theorized, marked a survey period. The creatures, he wrote, weren't random intruders. They were watchers, measuring the edge of human territory, testing our reaction, learning how far they could go before we noticed. And in May 2016, I realized, I had been part of their study.
I haven't gone for a jog since that morning. It's been 8 years, and I have never once stepped back onto that trail. I still exercise, regularly even, but always indoors, in the safety of a gym, surrounded by walls and lights. No open spaces, no trees, no shadows. I recognize what that means. It's a small surrender, a freedom lost because of a 5-minute encounter. Yet I also know this. Going back would be the height of stupidity. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't simply passing through. It was evaluating me, measuring my reactions, testing me like an experiment. And for reasons I will never understand, it decided to let me live. Sometimes, I wonder why. Was it because I ran instead of fighting? Did it see my retreat as submission and deem me harmless? Or maybe I just wasn't worth the effort, too mundane, too ordinary to be worth killing. There are nights when I lie awake, considering another possibility, that it was studying, that the whole event was an observation, a behavioral test conducted by something far older and more intelligent than I could grasp. What lingers with me most is the understanding that I no longer feel safe outside. The forest, which once felt like a sanctuary, now feels alien and hostile. Every rustle, every creak of a branch sounds like a warning. Every patch of darkness feels inhabited. I've lost something precious. The peace I used to find in the wilderness. The sense of harmony that came from running beneath open skies. In its place, I carry knowledge that most people are better off without. The awareness that we are not alone out there. If you are someone who hikes, camps, or runs in secluded places, take this as a warning. There are beings in those woods that do not fit within our understanding of nature. They are cunning, powerful, and observant. We are not the only sentient ones moving through these wild places. We share this planet with something else, something that thinks, that learns, and that watches. If you ever encounter it, do not stop. Do not shout. Do not fight. Run. Run, and hope that, like me, it finds you too unremarkable to destroy. My name is Lucy, and I'm 34 years old. I teach high school biology in northern Tennessee. My life now is calm, predictable, and outwardly normal. But 16 years ago, something happened that shattered that normality forever, and took from me one of the people I loved most. It's taken me this long to find the strength to talk about it. Even now, recalling those days reopens wounds I thought had healed. It was the summer of 2009. I was part of a small group of 6 friends. Myself, Marcus, Jennifer, David, Tom, and Ryan. We were all around the same age, college students or recent graduates, eager for adventure, still believing the world was wide and welcoming. Our plan was simple. 4 nights of camping, deep within a state park in eastern Kentucky, a place known for its rugged beauty and isolation. The remoteness appealed to us. We wanted to disconnect. No crowds, no cell service, no rules. We arrived on a warm Thursday evening in mid-July. The forecast promised several clear, mild days. The hike to our campsite took over an hour, winding through thick, towering forest until we reached a small valley surrounded by massive old trees. There were no other campers, no rangers, no human presence for miles. It felt perfect, at the time. That first night we set up our tents, cooked a simple dinner over the fire, and sat around talking long into the evening. We laughed, told stories, and felt the easy comfort that comes with youth and friendship. Ryan was the anchor of our group, the adventurous one, the natural leader. He had a magnetic personality that made everyone feel included. He and Jennifer were inseparable, that kind of young couple that seemed destined to last forever. Sometime after midnight, as we were preparing to sleep, I heard something strange. Faint noises from the woods around us, slow, deliberate movement. Nothing overtly threatening, but enough to make the hairs rise on my neck. I whispered to Marcus, my tent partner, and told him I thought something was moving out there. He chuckled, half asleep, and told me I was imagining things. "It's just raccoons or deer," he said. "Relax." I tried to believe him, but I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning I noticed that everyone looked unusually tired, though no one mentioned it. Over breakfast we decided to hike to a waterfall 5 miles away. As we packed up, I realized something unsettling. The forest was silent. No bird calls, no insect hum, not even the chatter of squirrels, just stillness. When I pointed it out, Tom shrugged it off, saying the animals were probably avoiding the midday heat. That explanation was enough for everyone, so we went on our way. The hike itself was peaceful, almost idyllic. The waterfall was stunning, a tall column of water cascading into a clear, cool basin. We swam, took photos, and for a few hours it felt like the unease from the night before had been forgotten. By the time we began the trek back, the sun was dipping below the trees. We reached camp just as twilight settled. Hunger and fatigue made us quiet as we cooked dinner, the comforting routine of food and conversation pushing the day toward normalcy. But, that second night, everything changed. As the forest went fully dark, I began to hear it again. The sound of something heavy moving just beyond the circle of firelight. It wasn't random movement. It was rhythmic, deliberate, paced. The shadows at the edge of our camp flickered strangely. At first, I thought it was a trick of the flames. Then, I realized the silhouettes were shifting shape, massive forms moving between the trees. I told the others. They brushed it off at first, laughing nervously, but when the sounds grew louder, branches snapping under heavy weight, dry leaves crunching, nobody was laughing anymore. Marcus grabbed a flashlight, suggesting we check it out. "Probably just a bear," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Ryan immediately shut that idea down. "No," he said firmly. "We're not going out there. Whatever that is, it's big. We stay here. We keep the fire going. We wait for morning." That's what we did. We sat shoulder to shoulder around the fire, feeding it every few minutes, watching the darkness for movement. The shapes stayed at the perimeter, never crossing into the light but never leaving either. It was as though something, or several somethings, were circling us, studying from just beyond our sight. The rhythmic motion around our campfire continued for hours. None of us spoke much. None of us dared to move from the circle of light. Every now and then, I thought I could see the glint of eyes between the trees. Eyes set far higher than a human's, reflecting the flames with an eerie yellow shimmer. The woods that had seemed peaceful and alive the day before now felt like the lair of something ancient and cruel. And as the night dragged on, I began to understand the truth. We were not alone in that valley, and we were not in control of what was happening. Sometime around 3 a.m, the movement stopped. The steady circling, the shifting silhouettes, gone. A heavy stillness fell over the camp, so absolute it felt unnatural. Even the forest seemed to be holding its breath. For a few minutes, none of us spoke. When the silence persisted, we dared to believe it was over. Maybe whatever had stalked us had finally left. We were terribly, tragically mistaken. Exhausted, we managed to drift into uneasy sleep. Dawn came gray and cold, and when we unzipped our tents, the sunlight revealed the first hint that something was horribly wrong. Ryan was missing. His tent stood exactly where he'd pitched it. His sleeping bag lay unrolled. His backpack and boots sat untouched beside it. But Ryan himself was gone. At first we called for him, thinking he'd gone to relieve himself or fetch water from the stream. But as the minutes passed and no answer came, the pit in my stomach deepened. The tent showed no sign of struggle. The flap had been opened, from the inside. It was as though he'd simply risen in the night, walked out into the dark, and vanished. Panic took hold. We tore through the immediate area, shouting his name until our voices cracked. Nothing. No footprints. No broken branches. No dropped belongings. Finally, we made the decision to break camp and head for the ranger station. None of us said it aloud, but we all felt the same thing. If we stayed, we might not all make it out. While collecting my gear, I noticed something about 20 yards away, in a patch of soft earth near the trees. I thought at first they were large animal tracks. But when I crouched down, my stomach lurched. They were enormous. Each print nearly 8 inches long, with deep, arched impressions and gouged claw marks. The spacing between them was wrong for any known animal. They fell in pairs, as if the creature had been walking upright. The trail led away from our campsite, swallowed by the dense forest. I called the others over. When Marcus saw them, he went pale. Jennifer turned and vomited in the grass. None of us spoke after that. We just packed faster. By the time we reached the park office, we were half delirious with fear and exhaustion. The rangers listened to our story, their expressions unreadable, and immediately launched a search. For the next 7 days, teams combed the woods. Dogs were brought in. Helicopters swept overhead. Every ravine, every clearing, every riverbank was scoured. Nothing was ever found. No sign of Ryan. No scraps of clothing, no body, no trace that he had ever existed in those woods at all. When the official investigation concluded, the report was sterile and predictable. The state police stated that Ryan had likely become disoriented during the night, wandered from camp, and succumbed to the elements, or perhaps been attacked by wildlife. But we knew that was a lie, or at least a desperate simplification. We had heard the thing in the darkness. We had seen the shapes, and we had found the tracks. Tracks no animal in Kentucky should have been capable of leaving. There was another detail that none of the officials seemed interested in hearing. Before that night, the woods had gone silent. No birdsong, no crickets, not even the faint buzz of mosquitoes. It was as though every living creature had fled, sensing what we could not. The forest itself had been warning us. In the weeks that followed, our group began to unravel. Jennifer, devastated beyond reason, drifted into a grief that consumed her. Ryan had been the love of her life, and the void left behind was too vast to fill. She withdrew from all of us, stopped answering calls, and eventually disappeared from contact altogether. Years later, I heard rumors that she had attempted to take her own life, though I never confirmed whether it was true. The rest of us tried, in our own ways, to escape what had happened.
Marcus moved west, chasing a new start in California. David spiraled into addiction, numbing the memories with whatever substances he could find. Tom enlisted in the military, perhaps searching for a structure that might quiet his mind. I sought help through therapy, but the words never came out right. How could I explain to someone who hadn't been there that the thing we saw wasn't an animal? No counselor could reconcile the gulf between the official narrative and the truth we had witnessed. 5 years passed before I stumbled upon an online forum dedicated to unexplained wilderness events, cryptozoological discussions, strange disappearances, folklore. Most of it read like fantasy, until I found stories that mirrored ours in disturbing detail. Across the continent, people described nights in remote campsites marked by unnatural silence, heavy footsteps circling tents, and massive humanoid tracks discovered at dawn. In many of those accounts, someone had vanished. One case chilled me to my core. A man from northern Maine writing about his brother's disappearance under nearly identical circumstances. The same missing tent occupant, the same absence of struggle, the same towering prints leading into the trees. His brother had vanished 6 months before Ryan did. Over 1,000 miles apart, yet the patterns matched perfectly. The man had devoted himself to researching such cases, maintaining a detailed archive of missing persons believed to be linked to unknown forest entities. According to his findings, at least 32 people had vanished from remote campsites across North America over 2 decades. The locations spanned from the Rockies to the Appalachians, with no clear regional concentration, as if whatever was responsible could roam anywhere it pleased. I reached out to him, sharing our story. He responded quickly, expressing sympathy and confirming that Ryan's disappearance aligned closely with dozens of others. He described a consistent behavioral pattern. The creatures, whatever they were, would stalk isolated groups, encircle them for hours, and ultimately select one person. No one knew how or why the choice was made. The chosen individual always vanished quietly, without evidence of violence or flight. The man's final message still haunts me. He said he believed these beings weren't killing for food. They were collecting, studying us, perhaps breeding us, or engaging in some purpose beyond our comprehension. And, he added grimly, in none of the documented cases had a missing person ever returned. Since that summer, I have never set foot in a forest again. I do not camp. I do not hike. Because I know now that the wilderness belongs to something else, and it is still watching. I cannot set foot in remote woods without a wave of paralyzing fear. What once felt like a refuge of calm and natural beauty now feels alien and hostile. The forest, once a sanctuary, has become a place of dread and unknowability. I no longer feel safe in natural spaces. Sometimes, I catch myself wondering if Ryan is still alive somewhere. Is he being observed? Held against his will? Or did he vanish entirely, consumed by something whose rules and motives exist far beyond human understanding? I will never have answers. That uncertainty, the endless, gnawing lack of closure, is perhaps the cruelest aspect of all. What I know beyond doubt is that the creature existed. We all saw it. The massive paw prints proved its physical presence. And it singled out Ryan, taking him into the forest. The official explanation, that he became disoriented, offers a comforting narrative for the public. It makes people believe that the wilderness is safe, that these events are anomalies. But for those of us who lived it, that story provides no solace. Ryan was 20 years old when he disappeared. He would be 36 now. Somewhere, perhaps he is still out there. Or perhaps he is not.
The uncertainty, the not knowing, is the sharpest pain of all. My name is Connor. I work as a police dispatcher in Millbrook, Ohio, a small town of roughly 8,000 residents in the northeastern part of the state. I have held this position for 12 years. Over that time, I have handled countless emergency calls, accident reports, and routine incidents. But nothing I experienced in my career could have prepared me for what unfolded during the second and third weeks of March 2015. During that period, our small town became the epicenter of a phenomenon so extraordinary and undeniable, it could not be rationalized away. The first reports came in on Friday, March 12th. Residents began calling in, describing strange noises emanating from the woods along the town's eastern edge. They described a low, rhythmic sound, something between a howl and a roar. It was unlike anything they had ever heard, and it unsettled both people and animals. I logged the calls and dispatched officers to investigate. They found nothing conclusive. Coyotes, one suggested. Perhaps a confused moose, another offered. The reports were recorded, filed, and largely dismissed. The next day, Saturday, March 13th, the sounds continued through the night, and reports started coming in more frequently. By Sunday morning, we had received over 30 calls detailing the same strange phenomenon. The police department began to take it seriously. Officers were sent to patrol the woods, searching for evidence. Once again, they found nothing. But the sounds persisted. The town could hear them. They were growing louder, more insistent, and increasingly aggressive. Then, on the evening of Monday, March 14th, the first livestock were discovered dead. The incident occurred on the property of a local farmer named Harold Chen. The animal, one of his prized breeding cattle, was worth thousands of dollars. What shocked Mr. Chen was not the death itself, but the way it had been executed. The animal had not been mauled by ordinary predators. Its death bore the marks of something methodical, something strong and intelligent. The animal had been killed with surgical precision, as if a conscious mind had controlled the act. I received Mr. Chen's call around 7 p.m. His voice trembled with fear and disbelief. He described seeing something enormous moving through the pasture at dusk, emerging from the woods and approaching his cattle. While the herd scattered in panic, one animal froze, paralyzed by fear. Then, he said, the creature took the animal and carried it into the forest. When Mr. Chen mustered the courage to follow, he discovered the carcass in a small clearing. The animal was dead, but largely intact. It had been placed deliberately, positioned as though being displayed. Over the next 48 hours, 6 more livestock deaths were reported, all following the same unsettling pattern. Horses, cattle, and sheep, all large animals, all arranged in carefully considered positions. The pattern became undeniable. Something intelligent was moving through the area deliberately, selecting targets and removing them with purpose. By Wednesday, March 16th, the story had reached regional news outlets. Residents of Millbrook were on high alert. Parents kept children indoors. Shops and businesses closed early. The town had shifted from routine life into a state of fear and vigilance, the kind that tightens muscles and quickens every heartbeat. Police presence was expanded to faux patrols, and additional officers from neighboring towns were called in to assist. The sheriff's department issued a formal advisory for residents to stay indoors after dark and to secure all livestock in barns or enclosed shelters. Then, on Thursday evening, March 19th, at approximately 8:45 p.m., more than 50 residents witnessed the creature simultaneously. What began as a single report had escalated into a town-wide event. The creature appeared near the edge of the highway along the eastern boundary of Millbrook. Multiple drivers reported seeing it as they traveled along the road. Numerous residents called 911 to describe what they were witnessing. Through the dispatch center, I was hearing real-time accounts from dozens of individuals, all describing the same entity. A massive, upright creature, cloaked in dark fur, standing roughly 8 feet tall. The creature moved slowly across the highway and into the heart of the business district.
It walked past the convenience store, the diner, and the gas station. Its movements were deliberate and unnerving, as if it were surveying the town and assessing its inhabitants. People reported it staring into windows. One woman, dining alone at a restaurant, said the creature had made eye contact with her through the glass. She described an intelligence in that gaze, an unmistakable awareness, and a sensation of being measured and evaluated by something far beyond normal animal cognition. The creature continued its path through town until reaching the central plaza, the area housing the town's administrative buildings. By then, roughly 200 residents had gathered, some in their cars, others standing outside, witnessing an event that seemed impossible. Police had arrived on the scene but were unsure how to act. You cannot charge a being that does not fit any legal framework. You cannot detain something that exists outside conventional law. The creature paused in the center of the plaza, illuminated by the streetlights, fully visible to the crowd. It appeared to regard them with something I can only describe as curiosity. Then it vocalized, the same sound that had unsettled the town for days, but now amplified to an almost deafening volume. The noise set off car alarms and reverberated through the crowd. Witnesses reported feeling the sound physically, a deep vibration that traveled through their bodies even at 30 or 40 yards distance. After approximately 3 minutes, the creature turned and walked purposefully back toward the forest from which it had emerged. It moved steadily, unhurried and unafraid. When it reached the edge of the highway, it paused briefly, glanced back at the assembled crowd, and then vanished into the darkness of the tree line. Chaos erupted. Phones rang non-stop. Residents, officers, and media personnel all clamored to report and document what they had seen. The night became a blur of confusion, urgency, and fear. One thing, however, was undeniable. The people of Millbrook had witnessed something extraordinary. This was not a hoax. This was not a misidentification. Over 200 individuals had seen the same entity, and the impossibility of denying its existence now confronted everyone directly. By the following morning, the story had reached international news. Major news networks descended upon the town. Scientists were consulted. Biologists weighed in. Wildlife experts offered speculation, but none could provide answers. The creature disappeared after that night. The sounds stopped. The livestock deaths ceased. By Saturday morning, the town seemed normal again, as if the phenomenon had never occurred. But the physical evidence remained. Dead livestock, massive paw prints pressed into mud and soft soil, first-hand accounts from hundreds of witnesses, and multiple videos captured on personal devices. The creature had been there. It had walked through Millbrook. It had observed the population, and then it had left. The official response from state authorities was frustratingly vague. The Ohio Department of Natural Resources issued no formal statement. Federal agencies refused to comment. Media coverage gradually faded as other events dominated the headlines. Life in Millbrook attempted to resume normal routines, but the sense of unease lingered. Looking back, what disturbs me most is the certainty I possess about what occurred. Though I never saw the creature firsthand,
I experienced it through the fear and disbelief of 200 residents describing it in real time. I heard the police officers striving to maintain professionalism while confronting something entirely beyond their training. I heard the confusion in the voices of scientists attempting to interpret the impossible. Through all of it, I understood that we had been in contact with a force outside conventional reality.
The creature had entered our town deliberately. It had revealed itself to hundreds of witnesses, then withdrawn. Its purpose remained unknown, but its existence was indisputable. In the years that followed, I researched other reports. I discovered that other towns had experienced similar phenomena, suggesting that Millbrook was not an isolated incident. In 1988, a small community in northern Pennsylvania reported weeks of strange sightings that ended with a town-wide observation remarkably similar to the one we experienced. In 1992, a township in Michigan experienced nearly identical circumstances. In 2003, a rural town in Wisconsin documented the same sequence: rising numbers of animal deaths, increasingly strange sounds in the woods, escalating sightings, and a culminating event where a large number of residents witnessed the creature at once. Every incident followed the same structure. Each climaxed in a direct encounter where the creature was visible to dozens or even hundreds of people. Each incident was then followed by official silence and an effort to normalize the unexplainable. I came to understand that these creatures were orchestrating these events deliberately. They were ensuring that humans saw them. They were establishing that they occupy the same world as us, sharing our territories and coexisting within our reality. Why they choose to reveal themselves remains a mystery. What is the purpose behind showing themselves to humans only to vanish afterward? What level of intelligence governs such behavior? These are questions I still ask myself, as do other residents of Millbrook who witnessed that unforgettable week in March 2015. We now hold knowledge that contradicts the official accounts and the comforting stories society tells itself about nature. The weight of that knowledge is heavy. It shifts your perception of reality. You begin to recognize that the world is far larger, far stranger, and far more mysterious than most people are willing to acknowledge. You also come to realize that there are entities moving through our forests and wilderness that we neither understand nor control. They are intelligent, they are powerful, and, for reasons known only to them, they choose when and how to reveal themselves to humans. More than 50 residents of Millbrook still maintain detailed records of the March 2015 events. Videos remain available online, despite occasional attempts to remove them. Livestock records persist. The documentation is concrete. Yet in the official narrative, the event is overlooked or dismissed. The gap between what we know and what authorities admit is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the entire phenomenon. My name is E.A., and I am 45 years old. I work as a social worker specializing in childhood trauma, a career that, in hindsight, seems almost inevitable given my own history. For 36 years, I suppressed memories of an event that occurred when I was 9 years old. I spent decades in therapy, developed coping strategies, and built a functioning life despite the underlying trauma. Recently, I realized that remaining silent has allowed a broader deception to persist. I can no longer stay quiet. The incident I experienced took place in September 1988, on a forest trail in northern Maine. My family had moved to the area that summer. Both of my parents were devoted outdoor enthusiasts and chose a rural location to pursue hiking and wilderness skills regularly. I was athletic, adventurous, and loved exploring the outdoors. My parents encouraged me to walk alone along a forest path near our home, believing it would build independence and a sense of responsibility. The trail I chose had been used by my parents many times.
It stretched roughly 3 miles to a small waterfall. It was well marked, and I had been instructed to stay on the path and return before dusk. I carried a small whistle for emergencies. By all reasonable measures, I was adequately prepared for a solo hike. What I was not prepared for was what awaited me along the path. About 1.5 miles in, I sensed movement beside me in the forest. At first, I assumed it was a deer. As I continued, the motion became unmistakable. Something large was keeping pace with me, moving between the trees but never fully revealing itself. I wasn't immediately afraid. My parents had taught me that most wildlife avoided humans, and contact was rarely dangerous. But then it vocalized. The sound was unlike anything I had ever heard. Low, resonant, almost like a roar, but with tones that suggested communication or intent. Fear surged through me, and I began to quicken my pace. The creature matched my movement, deliberately following. I broke into a run. The trail seemed endless, my legs burning, my lungs gasping. Behind me, I heard it moving at a speed that should have been impossible for such a massive form. I dared a glance back. A massive figure, upright, covered in dark fur, moving unnaturally fast, was following me. The moments that followed are a blur. Fear was so absolute that my conscious mind shut down. I ran off the path, scrambled into a tree, and wedged myself in the upper branches. I stayed there for hours, frozen in terror, too afraid to climb down or call for help. A search and rescue team found me around 10 p.m. My parents, alarmed by my failure to return, had alerted authorities. When discovered, I was catatonic, unable to speak or explain what had occurred. I was hospitalized and placed under psychiatric observation for 2 weeks. The official explanation: disorientation and panic led me to climb a tree. Therapy and medication helped me regain normal functioning, but the memory of the encounter remained buried deep in my subconscious. For years, I experienced what my parents and therapists labeled nightmares. What I now understand is that these were not mere dreams. They were fragmented memories attempting to surface from my traumatized mind. In my recurring nightmares, I would relive the chase through the forest. I would see the creature stalking me, feel the paralyzing terror that had frozen my mind and body. As I grew into my teenage years, my parents suggested we relocate. They worried that remaining near the site of my trauma was interfering with my recovery. I agreed, and at age 11 we moved to a town farther south in Maine. The immediate sense of relief was intense. Being distant from the forest seemed to loosen the grip of those memories. But the nightmares never fully disappeared. As I matured and gained a more sophisticated understanding of psychology, I realized that what I had experienced was real. Something had been following me along that forest trail. Something had been intentionally pursuing me. And it had been prevented from reaching me only because I had instinctively climbed that tree. For many years I assumed this was an isolated event, a single encounter with an unknown creature in a remote forest. I tried to move forward with my life. I went to college, built a career, formed relationships, and attempted to live normally. But in my work with traumatized children, I began noticing a disturbing pattern. Several clients, particularly those in rural Maine and surrounding states, described encounters with creatures in the forest. The similarities were striking. Large, upright animals that moved deliberately, seemingly aware and intelligent. One case involved a 9-year-old girl who recounted an experience almost identical to mine. She had been walking along a forest trail when she noticed a creature following her, She ran until she reached a road and flagged down a passing car. She had never spoken of the incident to anyone before therapy, framing it as a vivid nightmare that had felt real. Her account compelled me to investigate further. I reached out to fellow mental health professionals, especially those serving rural communities. The responses were startling.
Multiple therapists had clients who had endured nearly identical experiences. Children, alone in the forest, had encountered unknown creatures, then developed long-term anxiety disorders or agoraphobia. Even more concerning, these incidents were not recent. They had been occurring for decades. Records of similar experiences date back to the 1960s. The descriptions remained consistent. The ages of the children matched. The locations were all heavily forested areas in the northeastern United States. The psychological effects endured for years or even decades. A pattern emerged. Some entity in the forests of the Northeast had been intentionally targeting solitary children for generations. The creatures seemed to select young individuals, follow them deliberately, and allow them to escape. The reason for these encounters remains unknown, but the effects were undeniably devastating and long-lasting. I began meticulously documenting the cases. I contacted Child Protective Services, law enforcement, and other authorities to see if similar reports existed. Their responses were consistently evasive and unhelpful. When I pressed, I was met with dismissiveness. One officer even told me I was indulging in pseudoscience and should focus on established medical explanations for my client's trauma. 15 years ago, I decided to connect with researchers and advocates studying cryptozoological phenomena. I attended a conference and presented a paper on children's encounters with unknown creatures and the lasting psychological impact. The response was overwhelming. After my presentation, parents and adults began sharing similar stories, memories that had been suppressed for decades. Researchers with years of documentation approached me. One researcher shared a database of sightings in Maine going back to the 1950s. He had documented over 80 encounters with a bipedal, canine-like creature. Approximately 37% involved children. The pattern was clear. Children alone in the forest were being deliberately targeted. The most disturbing conclusion I reached was that official agencies may be aware of these creatures and could be actively suppressing information. This theory was supported by the consistent avoidance from law enforcement when questioned. No warnings were issued about forest dangers. Reports of children encountering these creatures were often normalized or dismissed. I have lived 36 years knowing that something real and terrifying happened to me in that forest. But the deeper worry is that children continue to face similar experiences. They are being pursued, traumatized, and dismissed. I am speaking out now because remaining silent is no longer an option. If there are creatures in our forests, intentionally targeting and traumatizing children, that truth must be acknowledged. Parents must be warned. Children must be protected. We must face the reality of the wild spaces we inhabit. In reopening the sealed chapter of my childhood, long-suppressed memories resurfaced with clarity. I now understand that what I experienced was neither a hallucination nor a psychological invention. It was real. And somewhere, in the forests of Maine and surrounding areas, that creature still exists. Perhaps even now, it is following another solitary child, driving them into terror, creating trauma that may remain buried for decades, just as it did for me. The thought of it continues to haunt me more than any personal memory of the encounter itself. My name is Henry, and my wife is Amelia. We are both in our early 50s now, and for the past 8 years, we have devoted ourselves to documenting and investigating a single incident that lasted less than 12 hours, but has irrevocably changed our understanding of safety, reality, and what may be living alongside us. We are sharing our story now because we are convinced that the official investigation was not simply negligent, but that the evidence may have been deliberately suppressed. We believe authorities are aware of what occurred and have chosen to keep it hidden rather than acknowledge it publicly. On the evening of April 14, 2017, Amelia and I were driving home from a weekend camping trip in the Cascade Mountains of Washington State. We had spent 2 days immersed in nature, hiking, and reconnecting as a couple. Our original plan was to return to the main highway by late afternoon, but we lingered at a breathtaking overlook and lost track of time. By the time we realized how late it was, we decided to take a secondary road, believing it would save us roughly 30 minutes of travel. That decision would prove disastrous. About 40 miles from our intended destination, on a deserted stretch of road with minimal traffic, our vehicle began to falter. Dashboard warning lights illuminated, and Amelia heard an alarming noise coming from under the hood. We managed to coast to the side of the road and pull onto a wide shoulder. When I opened the hood to inspect the engine, I found that one of the serpentine belts had come completely loose. It hung uselessly, rendering the vehicle inoperable. We were stranded with no cell reception, on a road rarely traveled, with the nearest town roughly 10 miles away. After discussing options, we agreed that Amelia would walk toward the town to find help, while I stayed with the vehicle. The plan was for her to reach a service station or alert authorities to send assistance. We locked the car and she began her walk. As darkness fell, I remained by the car, shivering in the cold April air. I had a jacket, but it was insufficient for the chill, and for the long hours I anticipated being outside. I tried to stay warm by pacing, occasionally returning to the vehicle and running the engine briefly for heat. The isolation was profound. The road stretched endlessly in both directions, utterly devoid of lights. Around 9 p.m., I noticed movement along the tree line bordering the road. At first, I thought it might be Amelia returning, but the figure was enormous and moved with a gait no human could produce. A massive shadow advanced parallel to the road, upright, at least 7 feet tall, covered in dark fur. It seemed aware of me, pausing to turn its head and regard me with a clear intelligence. I froze. My body refused to obey. Every instinct screamed to run or hide, yet I could not process the impossibility of what I was witnessing. The creature made a low, resonant sound, neither growl nor howl, but something in between. I could feel it vibrate through the ground and into my body. It moved closer to the road, not directly at me, but along a path that would eventually bring it near. Panic surged. I ran to the car, slammed the doors shut, and locked them, my hands trembling so violently that it took multiple attempts. Through the windshield, I saw the creature fully emerge onto the road. Moonlight revealed its enormous form, a living mass of intelligence and raw power that defied biological classification. It observed the car for a moment. I understood, in a chilling instant, that this was not a simple animal reacting instinctively. It was assessing the situation, evaluating the vehicle and its occupants, and making deliberate choices. The creature approached the hood and placed its massive paws against the metal. The vehicle shook beneath the pressure. Metal groaned under its weight. It seemed to be testing the strength of the barrier, evaluating whether it could breach it. After 30 seconds,
It stepped back and moved to the driver's side window. It leaned down and looked directly at me. Those moments remain the most disturbing of my life. I met its gaze and saw intelligence rivaling human cognition. I saw curiosity, assessment, and the capacity for violence tempered by deliberate choice. It remained at the window for approximately 2 minutes, studying me. Then, without warning, it struck the glass with a massive paw. The impact cracked the window in a spiderweb pattern. I screamed. The creature struck again, shattering the glass inward and spraying fragments across the interior. I scrambled to the rear of the vehicle, trying to create distance. It attempted to reach inside, but its massive frame could not fit through the opening. It moved to another part of the vehicle, searching for a point of entry. I realized the car was no longer a safe refuge. I grabbed my jacket, opened the rear passenger side door opposite the creature, and bolted down the road. Behind me, I heard its pursuit. The heavy footfalls, deep exhalations, occasional low vocalizations, all blending into a nightmare of sounds signaling I was being hunted by something far stronger and faster than myself. I ran until I saw lights ahead. A car was approaching. I waved frantically and screamed for help. The vehicle slowed. A woman inside looked at me with concern. She had stopped at a service station and contacted roadside assistance. I leapt into her car, gasping and explaining the situation as quickly as possible. She glanced back, then reversed quickly, distancing herself from my abandoned vehicle. In the headlights, I glimpsed the creature emerging from the forest, massive, powerful, eyes reflecting the light with an eerie glow. The driver continued to back up, then turned forward, accelerating away. Relief overwhelmed me. I gave the driver my contact information, asking her to call my wife. Amelia had arrived at the service station roughly 30 minutes earlier and had called for help. She was safe. Authorities arrived and retrieved my car. They searched the area for the creature but found nothing besides the damage to the vehicle and signs of something large moving through the woods. The official report concluded that I had encountered a black bear. The bear allegedly became aggressive, possibly defending cubs or startled by my presence. The damage to the car was attributed to bear activity.
But I know the truth. Amelia and I know that something attempted to breach our vehicle and pursued me. Over the last 8 years, we have investigated the road where this occurred. We discovered a history of similar reports spanning decades. Vehicle damage, reported pursuits, multiple eyewitness accounts. Attempts to engage Washington state authorities or law enforcement were met with dismissal, evasion, and ultimately, silence. We have thoroughly documented the encounter, photographed the damage, gathered historical reports, and interviewed other witnesses. Yet, nothing has changed. The road remains unmonitored. Travelers continue unaware of the danger. The most disturbing realization is that this may be deliberate. Authorities may know about these creatures and have chosen not to warn the public, prioritizing avoidance of panic over the safety of citizens. I have not driven alone since that night. Amelia experiences heightened anxiety in remote areas. We have both undergone therapy, but the psychological impact is modest compared to the existential one. We now live in a world where we understand we are not the only intelligent species in this region. We share space with something powerful, intelligent, and capable of violence. And the most infuriating part is our inability to warn others. We have no official platform, no sanctioned voice, only personal testimony. But we know what we experienced. We know what we saw. Somewhere on that remote Washington road, the creature remains. Still hunting. Still observing. Every time a disappearance or unexplained accident occurs in rural areas, we wonder if it was involved. How many encounters have ended more tragically than ours? We are alive, grateful. But the knowledge that authorities may be concealing this truth is more terrifying than the creature itself.